So hello and welcome. I'm Maggie Onisargan, the Public Programs and Relations Manager here at the Amarin Museum. Thank you for joining us today for Prehispanic Jewelry from the Sea with Dr. Elisa Villalpando. Before we begin our program, I would like to acknowledge that the Amarin is located in southern Arizona on lands where the Otham, Hopi, Oshwe, Yoeme, and Apache families have lived for untold generations and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We are grateful for what all these communities, rich in history, have to teach us. We would also like to thank all our members and donors who enable the Amarin to provide these free online programs and fulfill Amarin's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist the Amarin in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit amarin.org. Please join us on Saturday, June 3rd at 11 o'clock for a talk on the origins on Mayan civilization examined at Aguada, Phoenix, Mexico with Dr. Takeshi Inomata, speaking on recent findings from the site of Aguada, Phoenix in Mexico, which was discovered in 2018. The results of the investigations at this site are changing our understandings of how the Maya civilization and surrounding societies developed. Please visit the events section or Amarin's Facebook page or website, amarin.org, for registration and details for these and any other upcoming programs. If you would like to ask questions during today's program, please type your questions in the Q&A chat box. We will gather those questions to share with our speaker after her presentation. Also, a link to today's recording will be sent to all those who registered, and it will also be posted to YouTube. I am now pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Elisa Villalpando. She is with the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Sonora, Mexico. She was born in Baja California Sur. She is a graduate as an archaeologist from the National School of Anthropology and History in 1984 and the Center for Historical Studies at the College of Mexico in Colmex in 1992. She has participated and directed archaeological projects for the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Sonora since 1979, initially on hunter-gatherers and fishermen at San Esteban and Tiburon Islands in the Gulf of California and the Sonoran coast, and later leading binational projects on early agricultural period communities and Trincheras prehistoric settlements of the Sonoran Desert. She is the author of numerous articles and some books on these topics and has organized several symposiums and exhibits across the Arizona-Sonoran border. She directed Cerro de Trincheras opening as a site for public visit in 2011, working with the local community in public archaeology. She has produced museum scripts and curatorship for Cerro de Trincheras Visitor Center and for the INAH Regional Museum of Sonora. As a result of the experience of collaborating in the design of exhibits and the interpretive trail in the archaeological zone, she is interested in the accessibility and inclusion of all people to cultural heritage. She is currently a member of the Society for American Archaeology, the Arizona Archaeological Historical Society. She serves on the board of the Amarin Museum, the Mexican Society of Anthropology, and recently an advisor to museums and expositions at INAH. Dr. Villalpando has been awarded international recognition for her work in the diffusion of archaeological knowledge of Northwestern Mexico on both sides of the border. So please welcome Dr. Elisa Villalpando.
Thank you for your introduction, Maggie. And I think I'm gonna share screen. Well, thank you again to Amarin for this invitation. And I just want to let you know that I'm going to show some images of shell as funerary objects, but I'm not going to show to exhibit the funerary. I'm going to exhibit the funerary objects, but not the human remains. So I want to warn this before my talk. From time immemorial, humans have had a very close relationship with one of the most enduring materials that suggest human existence, shell artifacts. Some evidences are the intentional engravings on pseudodon attributed to Homo erectus in Indonesia. Others are beads associated to Neanderthal. And others are perforated gastropods date to the European Upper Paleolithic. Ornaments in seashell from both the Pacific Ocean, what is called the Panamic Province, and the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean province, as well as some freshwater of freshwater origin, have been extensively studied in Mesoamerica and the American Southwest. But in order to identify and classify them, they are divided by family, genus, and species. In Mexico, the pioneering work of Lourdes Suarez and the most recent studies of Adrián Velázquez and the interdisciplinary team of Templo Mayor are the best known. Southwestern archaeologists, as are Vaux, Victoria Vargas, and others, follow the incredible classificatory work of the Peso, Rinaldo, and Fenner of Casas Grandes shell, complemented by the amazing drawings of Alice Wesch. Identification to the level of the species is quite difficult sometimes by effects of aging, dying, or even the polishing, the cultural polishing of the shell, which erase the color and other characteristic of the natural shell. But it is very important because the provenience of this species, especially at inland prehistoric sites. In Mesoamerica, seashells not only have been identified as ornaments, but associated with figurines and sculpture. Examples of this are the ornaments in gastropods and pelecypods in the anthropomorphic figures of West Mexico that we can see here on arms of the clay figures. And also in some other anthropomorphic pendants from the Mesoamerican preclassic and classic periods. Mollusks as part of Toltecan sculpture are striking, as the feathers coyote, whose feathers are formed by plates of abalone, Aliotis from the Californian coast, or the coraza, the best from Palacio Quemado in Tula, formed by thousands of spondylus and cama beads, or the ejecacotzal, the jewel of the wind, which constitutes the characteristic pectoral pendant of the god Quetzalcoatl, and the Epcolali earrings in Pintada Mazatlanica from offerings found on the cyst of Templo Mayor with other marine specimens from the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. In the Sonoran archaeological traditions of Northwest, Southwest, as we prefer to call this macro area, ornamental shells from the Gulf of California and in general from the Panamic province to Northern California are the only ones present. No species from the Gulf of California have been identified in Sonoran sites. Nonetheless, the evidences of exchange networks with West Mexico are well known, as in Paquimé with the presence of Persicula bandera beads, which is a species endemic of the shores of Bahía de Banderas in the west coast of Nayarit in Mexico. We are not quite sure of the temporal depth in the use of marine shell as ornamental objects in the Northwest Southwest. To my knowledge, there is no association with Clovis people. And shells used as tools are associated with the archaic hunters in the coastal dunes of Sierra del Pinacate, where Julian Hayden reported Kione, a bulb, apparently used for scrapping or as ornament. And at Sierra del Pinacate, there's a path from inland to the sea marked by shell petroglyphs in Tinaja de las Conchas in Sierra del Pinacate, which probably signal a later Hohokam route. Malacological artifacts attract the attention of Southwestern archaeologists since mid-20th century. Archaeologists or geographers who explore territories south of the international border, searching for connections between Mesoamerica and the American Southwest. La Playa, an archaeological site in the Boquillas alluvial fan in the middle Magdalena Valley, was suggested to be a workshop specialized in the manufacture of ornaments within the commercial networks that connect both cultural areas. Many decades had to pass before the true dimension of the material culture present in this emblematic early agricultural period site of Northwest Mexico was understood. At La Playa, we have recovered shell ornaments from almost all the site that is around 10 square kilometers in diameter, but mainly from shell come from two areas that we named Concheria 1 and Concheria 2, shell places 1 and 2, where shell is present not as a sort of food, but as an indicator of a status and identity statement. As you probably know, excavation of early agricultural period sites in the Tucson Basin has produced an important number of shell marine ornaments. Sites dating to the San Pedro phase, 1200-800 BC, include Las Capas, Milagro, El Taller, and Dairy site. The Ciénega phase sites, 800 BC to 50 AD, includes Clearwater, Los Pozos, Coffee Camp, Santa Cruz Bend, and Stone Pipe. Most of the shell comes from the Gulf of California, and some specimens from the southern coast of California. Freshwater shells from the Santa Cruz River are poorly represented in these sites. However, Anodonta valves and Zucchinida shell coming from the canals of these early agricultural sites are a very good indicator of chronometric value. Tucson Basin early agricultural villages seem to appreciate shell ornaments, which they acquire either by traveling to the upper coast of the Gulf of California or perhaps through village-to-village exchange. There are several species of that include pelecypods as Levicardium, Spondylus, Gama, Teria, Tintada, Docini, and some others, and also gastropod shells used for beads and pendants as Olivella, Conus, Cyprea, Columbella, or Oliva. Most of the orthomorphic beads were just worked by relatively simple manufacturer, where you just have to perforate the ends to produce a hole which could pass by a fiber and create a necklace. Some burials contain shell ornaments more than other types of associated paraphernalia. At the wetland site in the Tucson Basin, ornaments made of abalone shell from Aliotis and some triangular and rectangular earrings are present. Also in a cremation at Los Pozos Coffee Camp, there were 800 quadrangular beads, and at Los Pozos, a set of elongated pendants with perforations on both ends. La Playa in northwestern Sonora is a very rich and unique place. As I already said, it is a multi-component site containing evidences of Paleo-Indian, Middle Archaic, as well as a continuing occupation from the Archaic to mid-20th century. Most of the features and artifacts at the site are associated with the early agricultural period, in addition to later early ceramic and trincheras tradition components. Site of Ciénega phase indicate more dependence on agriculture than with more formal structures, a greater diversity of artifacts, a greater number of storage pits, more outdoor storage capacity, and sometimes larger communal houses, possibly due to more sedentary population. Malacological assemblage of La Playa and contemporary sites of early agriculture period at the Santa Cruz Basin is very, very similar, which allow us to consider that communities of the Sonoran Desert at that time share the same identity. It has been possible to identify 3 scales of resource management within a logistic mobility strategy based both on the distribution of resources and the topography of the Sonoran Desert. Immediate resource management and procurement could include the clearing of fields and irrigation systems. Local resource management could have included short distance travel over the terrain to obtain wild resources, and management of distant resources could have included long distance travel, often to search for seasonal resources, raw material, and exchange. Within this third category, village residents would have made trips to obtain pelecypods and gastropods from the Gulf of California. Bracelets on glycimeris valves are the most common ornament. However, manufacture technology seems to mark differences within archaeological traditions over time. Initially, in La Playa, it has been possible to reconstruct the process of manufacture from what we have called a canal polishing. You can see it here in this slide, how with a reamer, artisans begin to form a canal around the dome of the valve in order to thin the upper valve, and then hitting it could take this dome out and begin the polishing of the rim. We have recorded thousands of glycimeris scattered through the site, concentrating, as I said, in Concheria 1 and Concheria 2, where other evidences, in addition to the burial dating, have been dated to early agriculture period. All the stages of production of glycimeris are present, although there are notorious differences between production debris with respect to finished ornaments, or later the stages of manufacture. Few domes show a different technique of elaboration with facets instead of channeled, a technique that is more similar to southern Sonora shell ornaments, and the large amount of raw material and the domes. That's what indicates that people from La Playa could have direct access to this resource. Human burials excavated at La Playa are almost 400 at present. 45 are dated to the early agricultural period, and 9 to early ceramic period, 3 to Trincheras. However, only 12 have funerary objects associated. This could indicate that despite the easy access to raw materials, they could not have been for the ornamental or ritual use of the agricultural communities of the Boquillas Valley, but to consolidate alliances and connectivity with other contemporary communities. A higher frequency of ornaments in nacreous species are associated with male burials versus gastropod beads, like the ones we see with the necklace, with simple perforation or discoidal beads associated with female burials. What is surprising is that despite the enormous production of glycimeris bracelets to date, we have not recovered a single one in association with any burial, neither as an offering, which could suggest that the high production of bracelets, more than an identity component of the communities of the Boquillas Basin, were manufactured for exchange with other early agricultural communities of the area. There are evidences of shell jewelry manufactured of 18 species of pelecypods and 15 species of gastropods. As I say, Pintamas atlantica, Pteria externa, and Modiolus are the nacreous shells that we just recover as finished objects. We don't have the process of manufacturing them, but we think that it's because they are quite fragile and they are not preserving the context, the archaeological context. As I said before, ornamental shed could be related to identity, but we do not always could infer its use. As example of this is found in relation to glycimeris, which have been constantly referred as bracelets or armlets, without necessarily being recovered from arms or of individuals. And here, if we look at the prominent mural of La Proveedora in the Trincheras tradition, which is associated with the Trincheras component from before the emergence of the regional center of the Magdalena Valley. We can see some circles where the ears of the figures, the anthropomorphic figures, could be seen. And I propose that it could be the use of glycemiris that we call bracelet, but could be also used as earrings. And it's quite different from the ornaments that have some of the ancestral Pueblo petroglyphs, which we can see that are absolutely different. But these do not mean that all our interpretations of material culture are incorrect, because in other archaeological contexts that have been found, glycemiris bracelet have been found just as bracelets or arms, as in a burial recovered in later contexts of the Trincheras tradition at Magdalena and some other places. Over time, shell artisans not only develop more efficient technology with less waste of raw material, but they get it through the manufacturing, another technique of manufacture to have different evidences in the domes of the glycemiris shells. And this is found not just in the Guignac site in the coastal tradition area, in sites and near Kino Bay that have assemblages that could be the thing that belongs not just to Trincheras, but also to coastal groups, and also in the Altar Valley in the Altar Valley in Sonora, where artisans modify the technique to get the final product more efficiently by polishing the dome in different directions to thin a rim in order not to break the exterior ring. Hohokam specialized in shell manufacture ornaments like Hinside, Shelltown, and another from the Papagueria, produce a huge concentration of powder shell, which is an evidence of the transformation of the valve by a different technique, vanishing the entire upper structure of the mollusk. Also in the Hohokam area, artisans developed sophisticated methods of carving, etching, application of turquoise tessera, and having a degree of remarkable sophistication before 1200 AD. Shell ornaments also have been recovered among the Central Coast tradition societies, where we have recorded long strings of cap beads of various species, both of gastropods and pelecypods. An example of these are the more than 200 beads recovered from a rescue excavation of a mere burial in a coastal dune near the town of Desemboque. Several were found inside the mouth of the individual, and the bed carving could have been done with a perforated ceramic disc, a ceramic that were used, and that consistency found in sites associated with the temporary settlements of the Concac people or the Seri ancestors. In contrast to the communities of the Sonoran Desert, the material culture of the communities of the Onevar Valley in central Sonora allow us to approach their identity characteristics not only through shell objects, but in their own person. Cranial deformation practices from a very early age undoubtedly gave them a very visible identity attribute. And although the species used in the manufacture of ornaments are not so different from the rest of the archaeological tradition of Northwest Mexico, the designs, as you can see here, this is a frog in Pintada Mazatlanica, earrings, earmuff, and are in Pintada Mazatlanica too, have a much more Mesoamerican or West Mexico air than the rest of the malacological materials of the Northwest Southwest. Trincheras tradition communities at El Cerro, phase of late Prehispanic period from 1300 to 1450 AD are considered the successor of the shell artisans in the Sonoran Desert. Not only within the regional center of the Trincheras tradition, Cerro de Trincheras, shell artisans occupy a particular area of the terraced town, but shell mark an identity, idiosyncratic value, or status, which is also reflected in the main structure known as Plaza El Caracol. In Cerro de Trincheras, glycimerous bracelets recovered from mid-19 excavations by Magdalena and Villalpando are quite thin and rectangular in section, which are different from the first bracelets of early agricultural period. And they are decorated by incision with geometric designs similar to those present on the Trinchera ceramic that was used previous to the emergence of the regional center in the middle Magdalena Valley. Designs are absent from the diagnostic ceramic of Cerro de Trincheras, which suggests that the identity values in Trincheras communities moved to their shell ornaments, perhaps to resignify the origin of those prestige goods. A late Prehispanic period Trincheras site artisans use widely the upper part of the glycimerous valves for thin zoomorphic pendants like the ones we can see here, the low part of the slide, or for earrings carved as frog or turtles. Specimens of iridescent shell are quite similar to Hohokam, but there is no notable occurrence of ornaments obtained from the colored shells of Chione, Kama, or Spondylus, which are in higher quantities among the Hohokam sites. Conus is a temporal marker in Northwestern, Southwestern societies. It is not present in the early malacological artifactual assemblages, and a large number of rings, beads, and broken conus were collected at Cerro de Trincheras terraces and workshop areas. Conus was as important to Trincheras, El Cerro face community, that the main structure at Plaza El Caracol resembles it, in addition to another architectural feature below Shell Artisans Barrio. And we are almost certain that conus polished in the apex and perforated to hold as tinklers could have been musical instruments as El Cerro communities, as the present Joemes use of the Navaris to perform ceremonies or dances as community integration of the pre-Hispanic town. Conus rings have also similar designs to those of the bracelets. It is also interesting that what we describe as rings were not necessarily used on fingers, because in the site of San Cayetano de Tumacacori, excavated by the Peso in the mid-50s, several burials had conus rings that we call rings, but they have the conus as beads around their necks. Another ornamental set recovered from Cerro de Trincheras was associated with the funerary urns of the cemetery at the base of the hill. Shell ornaments were cremated with individuals as their life possessions. In some cases, they are preserved intact, despite having been exposed to fire higher than 600 degrees, which is the temperature necessary for the transformation of bodies into ashes. Perhaps the most notable of the shell materials that accompany the funerary urns at Cerro de Trincheras are the hundreds of beads that both in stone and shell that were not only inside the urns, but in the primary cremation area, possibly offered by the mourners, as we know from ethnographic references that occur among the human group of the Colorado River Delta, who, as a sign of respect to the deceased, throw their necklaces into the pier. Bioarchaeological analysis of individuals, both of crematoria and the cemetery, through intersection of biological sex and age at death, allow us to interpret who could manufacture and weld shell paraphernalia. We noticed that there are more shell bracelets associated to female individuals and with adults than infants. So we propose that females were not only artisans, but also the glycemius bracelet users, more or less as an identity status among them. Exchange relations and connectivity that I pointed out at the beginning of the talk were also changing over time and according to the leading members of the pre-Hispanic communities. I just want to highlight that the relationship between societies living at Cerro de Trincheras and Paquime, because from 1300 to 1500 AD, the axis of connectivity was stronger east to west than in a north-south direction. Shell as raw material or ornaments could be the exchange good that Trinchera societies trade for the polychrome ceramics of Casas Grandes, until both regional centers changed their status at mid-1500 AD. I want to notice that the total amount of shell items at Paquime, which are almost 4 million, is provocative because if we discount the Nasarius gastropods as the main species that is present, which are 3 million, almost the 4 million were are Nasarius perforated with. There were simple work by a single perforation to be suspended as beads. If we erase this amount, the amount of shell jewelry and quality of manufacture is surprisingly low, except for less than maybe 50 shell items that are of extraordinary quality. But I used to say that if we don't count the Nasarius beads, which are quite simple to transform in beads, there is really not so much shell at Casas Grandes. I recognize the extraordinary analysis of the peso, Rinaldo and Fenner, and the artistic reconstruction of shell use. But I also think that the interpretation of slave artisans working the shell jewelry in closed rooms just to produce the Nasarius shell beads, I think now is quite questionable. To finish my talk, I must note that the system of colonial Spanish domination changed the meaning of personal adornment on shell as element of identity. We only find bracelet, ahorcas, necklaces, earmuff, nose rings, and earrings among the societies of greater mobility known by the colonial regime as seris, or the conquered ancestors. Shell ornaments were no longer present among Pima, Opatas, and in fact, among the Cajite speakers, the only shell ornament preserved is related with deer dance paraphernalia as a cross-mother of pearl shell, sometimes in Pintada Mazatlanica, sometimes in Terra Externa, but more recently in Austria, which is much more easy to get. Revitalization of marine shell jewelry among the conquered as necklaces, earrings, or bracelets was more as an economic income to sell to outsiders decades ago. But much more recently, it is wearing as their personal attire without gender distinction. If you see actual photos of conquered people from both men, women, child, they are all using shells among their personal attire without gender distinction. Well, I hope that I have been able to illustrate the potential that archaeological, malacological artifacts, the jewels from the sea, have in the study of past societies. I declare myself for an archaeology that goes beyond the taxonomic description of objects, because I think if we don't think that we are facing relationships of people with their environment or movement of goods or connectivity among societies in the past, our archaeological investigations would be meaningless. I thank again Amerin for inviting me to present one of my passions, shell jewelry. And I would like to thank also my colleagues who have analyzed shell from La Playa, Cerro de Trincheras, the Middle Magdalena villages, and ornaments. I thank them for sharing their knowledge, their photos, and maps. And again, I thank Amerin for the invitation, and I thank you for your patience with my English. Thank you very much.
Dr. Villalpando, we have just a couple questions.
Yes.
The first one was, I was taught that Hohokam Otham were the first people to practice shell etching around 1000 AD on jewelry mainly, well before anything like that was performed in Europe. However, what about this practice by early cultures in the American Southwest did they learn, and who brought this technique from earlier cultures? Thank you.
Well, I think, as I said, Hohokam were not the first shell carvings, shell artisans. There are evidences of early agricultural period sites in the Tucson Basin, and we have found it also in La Playa. And La Playa, well, in La Playa, we have found a lot of shell debris, but we do have also dated burials that date to early agricultural period that have some of the shell ornaments. So Hohokam was a little bit later, and I would say that there are a lot of studies that share the knowledge of shell was since early agricultural period villages.
The second question from Sarah, is there any shell species recorded at La Playa or Trincheras site that comes from the Gulf?
The Gulf of Mexico? No, the Gulf of California. Well, they are all coming from the Gulf of California.
Okay. And from Wendy, what was on the first pic of the presentation? Does Dr. Villalpando have a book out? And if so, where can I get a copy? This was such an amazing presentation. I'm so thankful. I would like to read and see more of her work.
Thank you. Well, there are several papers on shell. Most of them are in Spanish. So if you read Spanish, I could share some references on this. But there's also a paper on the Journal of the Southwest who says something about the early agricultural period sites. And let me show this book, the excavations on Cerro de Trincheras. You can find some information there in English too. Thank you.
One from PK. Do you believe after 700 AD that Trincheras used the Altar Valley to move shell north to the Santa Cruz and Salt Gila complex?
Trincheras is south of the Santa Cruz Valley. Trincheras is, I'll show a map. Trincheras is in the, could I, again, am I still sharing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me move to the map to show you where. Well, Trincheras is south of the Santa Cruz, and Cerro de Trincheras is in the Middle Magdalena Valley. I don't know if I understand exactly the question, but it's south of the Santa Cruz River in Arizona.
Yeah, he's asking if it moved north, so yeah. And one from Maryland. Do you have any, okay. She was asking about articles in English. Do you think that shell jewelry was associated with higher status individuals?
Not necessarily in the first, in the early agricultures. It seems that it's more like identity status and not necessarily with identity signaling of the people who belongs to certain communities. Probably in some other societies which are far beyond the coast, it could be a prestige good that associated with the status. But I think it depends of where we found the artifacts, and that's why it is quite important to excavate the burials that have them, because it's the only way that we could absolutely know the context of their use and have more information about who is using the shell as ornaments. Which is interesting is sometimes as the owner as context, they seem to be as a symbol of the status of the people who is using it. And a status that is not only with adult individuals, but also with infants that probably belong to a family who was, or a group that was more important in the community.
And related to that question, is there any thought or theory as to why the shells were put in their mouths? The shells that were found in there.
Not many information about it, but probably they were as necklaces all around the neck, and because of the information of some other necklaces in the Sonoran Central Coast, there are thousands, 30,000 beads. Probably they were all around the neck, and sometimes some of them were, because of the movement of the body, that they went into the mouth. But we can say that it was intentionally put into the mouth of the male that was buried with the necklace.
And one from Christina. Can you talk more about the difference in bracelets between La Playa and El Cerro? Is there manufacturing waste on the Cerro?
Yeah, there is manufacturing waste in the Cerro, but not as much as La Playa. In La Playa, we find the highest quantities are debris and not work shell, especially on glycimeris pelecypods. And at Cerro de Trincheras, there is waste of the way they get the bracelet or the armlet or even the pendant, but the central dome of the valve was also polished to, as I show you, to get turtles or frogs. There's much less waste in Cerro de Trincheras than in La Playa. That's why we think that probably access to the coast was not the same for the El Cerro community than it was for the early agricultural community of La Playa. But there are waste in both contexts, but much more higher quantity in La Playa than in Cerro.
And one from Elizabeth in Spanish, and I hope I'm getting this right. She's asking if you can describe in more technique the techniques and instruments to make the jewelry. Any information?
Well, we do have information from the early agriculture period at La Playa, where we can, let me try to get to it. Here we have a lot of instruments that were used to get the glycimeris bracelet or armlets. We do have some instruments, artifact that could be used as instrument at the Cerro, but not as many as we found in La Playa, which is amazing because we have much more bracelets, finished bracelets at Cerro de Trincheras at La Playa, but the instruments seems to be quite different. We don't have this kind of reamers in Cerro de Trincheras as we have it from La Playa. I can say exactly why we don't have so much artifacts or tools to produce the shell, or maybe it's because in La Playa they were also experimenting with different tools that maybe were more sophisticated in El Cerro phase, El Cerro de Trincheras. They don't need to have so many instruments for the shell process manufacture as they were using it in La Playa. I don't know. That's a very good question. I have to think more about it.
And one from Glory. How far north were the shells jewelry traded?
Quite north. And interesting, the Wupatki site has a lot of shell from the Gulf of California coast. But on the east coast of United States, it was traded to the Cahokia people very far inland. The shell was moved because it was the main object of adornment for many societies in the past, in the prehistoric society of the American Southwest. There are a lot of shell, and Victoria Vargas has a paper, a book on shell, but there are a lot of people working with shell ornaments in the American Southwest, and they found a lot of artifacts quite inland and quite north.
And one from Arthur. Have you seen shift in the relative quantity of nacreous ornaments to non-nacreous style over time?
Yes, yes, certainly. And different styles. And as I say, at the Ornaments Valley, the styles are very Western Mexico. But yeah, Cerro de Trincheras, nacreous are much more sophisticated than the ones that we have from early agriculture period. Yes, yes, I would say yes.
And what are the reamers made from?
These particular ones are from a local raw material that is in the Boquillas Sierra in the La Playa archaeological area. We used to call it schist, but I think recently it was identified as another mineral. But those are almost in the same mineral. But in Cerro de Trincheras, we have different tools. Some of our minerals that could be easily used, find in the Magdalena River. So they not necessarily are coming from the immediate area of Cerro de Trincheras, because there were stones that are coming from in the Magdalena River. But in La Playa, they are absolutely from a source of mineral that is in the site.
And then the last question is, the curved caracal featured atop Cerro de Trincheras, symbolic of shell. The curved shape seems similar. Thank you for a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And yes, we think that that El Caracol at Cerro de Trincheras is like a gastrop, maybe conus cut, and that's the shape it has. And there's, as I said, there's another architectural feature in the terraces down below the barrio, the shell artisans barrio, that it also resembles the conus cut shell. And we found at El Caracolito a lot of conus debris. So yeah, conus was very important for them, for the Cerro de Trincheras people.
Great, I think that's it. Dr. Villalpando, if you send me the title of that book, I will put it out when I put out the email.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I would be very glad to share some other references in English, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with all of us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your patience. I hope it was understandable by English. Thank you very much.
No, I hope I didn't massacre your name too much. And
No, Maggie, certainly no. Thank you very much.
thank you again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.